So the PSVR2 will officially launch on the 22nd of February this year. As is typically the case with the release of new consoles and hardware, many fans are speculating as to whether or not the PSVR2 will succeed or fail hard. Now, I will say that the PSVR2 has a lot going for it and even some features that set it apart from competitors like the Quest 2. The big question we need to answer then is whether these new features justify the $550 price tag. In truth, the PSVR2 ain't cheap, but it's hardly the most expensive headset around. That said, does the PSVR2 have the right stuff and enough great titles to attract fans of VR and keep them entertained? Let's take a closer look and find out if the PSVR2 is a brilliant move on Sony's part or a massive blunder. So to begin, I'd like to talk about the timing of the PSVR2's release. There are several different VR companies in the world, one of which is Meta. At the end of 2021, Mark Zuckerberg went full steam ahead on the metaverse. Just 1 year later, Meta's market value had plunged $700 billion. Of course, this doesn't mean that Meta's out of the game, as it were, but things aren't exactly great at the company, with some critics and analysts suggesting that Meta is quietly collapsing. But the PSVR2 is due to release just shy of 4 months since Meta took its huge financial tumble. I'm not necessarily suggesting that Sony planned this release date with Meta's woes in mind, but as the saying goes, timing is everything. And as for Sony's own timeline, the original PSVR launched about 7 years ago in 2016. The headset worked with the PS4 and cost about $400 at launch. This is basically the same price as the PS4 when it launched back in 2013. Bear in mind that the time between the launch of the PS4 and the PSVR is just short of 3 years. Now the timing here kinda makes sense since the PSVR essentially reignited interest in the PS4, or at the very least gave current PS4 owners something new to be excited about. According to statistics, just over 3 years later in January 2020, the PSVR had sold 5 million units worldwide. This means the PSVR was a commercial success and arguably the most successful VR headset to be released thus far. It's therefore safe to assume that Sony wants to repeat this success or even surpass it with the PSVR2. Now there's no doubt that the PSVR2 is superior to the PSVR in every way, except for the price tag of course. When it comes to creating an immersive sensory experience, the PSVR2 has it all. Headset feedback, eye tracking, 3D audio, adaptive triggers, haptic feedback in the controllers, you name it, this thing's got it. In terms of visuals, the PSVR2 packs an OLED display with 2000 by 2040 pixels per eye. It also has a 110-degree field of view and a refresh rate of up to 120 Hz. This is basically twice the resolution of the original PSVR and a little bit higher than the Quest 2. And with the PSVR2 powered by the PS5, you can bet that from a graphics perspective, your VR experience should be an awesome one. But now let's return to the issue of timing. Now for some fans, the PSVR2 itself is not the problem. As I mentioned earlier, the PSVR released about 3 years after the launch of the PS4. This time around, the PSVR2 is launching 2 years and 3 months after the release of the PS5. That's about 7 months earlier than the release of the PSVR after the PS4. And there's actually a couple of other factors to consider here. For one, we're living in a post-pandemic world. Secondly, the current geopolitical situation has led to a massive cost of living crisis across the globe. Long story short, disposable income isn't about to become abundant anytime soon. Now if you don't already own one, a PS5 will set you back about $500 while the PSVR2 will retail for about $550. That's a total of $1,050, which is well out of reach for most consumers. Add to this that the current lineup of games for the PSVR2 are just ports of existing VR games, and you start to see why many critics believe the PSVR2 will flop. Admittedly, the timing isn't really all that ideal, but I think it's safe to assume that Sony learned a lot from the PSVR, which now has a good reputation among the majority of users. That seems to bode well for the long-term success of the PSVR2. But perhaps the best way to determine the success of the PSVR2 is to look at the success of the PS5. At the recent CES conference, PlayStation CEO Jim Ryan announced that the PS5 had sold over 30 million units worldwide. It hasn't really been a very easy journey for the PS5, which has been plagued by chip shortages and scalpers, meaning that actually acquiring a PS5 has been extremely difficult for the majority of fans. However, thanks to some smart moves on Sony's part, a PlayStation 5 should be a lot easier to come by going forward. In spite of all the challenges it's faced so far, the PS5 seems to be succeeding. In fact, Sony has so much faith in the PS5 that they believe it could outsell the PS4 by as early as 2024. 2023 is set to be a big year for the PS5, and with exclusive titles like Final Fantasy XVI and Marvel's Spider-Man 2, the success and popularity of the PS5 is only set to increase. On this basis, I don't think the PSVR2 is going to fail. The PSVR2 is leagues ahead of the PSVR and has some really awesome innovations that I think will set it apart from its competitors. There may not be a huge number of titles for the PSVR 2 right now, but I have a feeling that many will be in the pipeline soon enough. The PSVR 2 is pricey, but if you can afford it, I think it's well worth the money. And that's pretty much everything I have to say. But how about you? What do you think of the PSVR 2? Is it worth the money, or is it just too expensive? Please be sure to share all your thoughts and opinions in the comments, and we'll make sure to read them all. And if you could like and subscribe and hit the bell, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Later!